She should have died out there, long before anyone ever found her. The wind came screaming across the Wyoming plains, sharp and merciless, driving snow sideways like shards of broken glass. And Clara Whitmore could barely keep her feet beneath her as she stumbled forward, her thin dress clinging to her legs, soaked through, heavy as chains. Her fingers were numb, her lips cracked, each breath tearing at her chest like ice. And still she kept moving, because stopping meant freezing, and freezing meant disappearing into the white nothing that swallowed everything out here. She had not meant to come this far. She had not meant to be the one sent. But the stage had left her at the edge of nowhere, and the storm had followed. Or maybe it had been waiting for her. The world narrowed to wind and white and the faint outline of something ahead, a structure, maybe, or a trick of the storm, and she blinked hard, forcing her burning eyes to focus as her boots dragged through drifts already climbing past her ankles. One more step, then another. That was all she could manage. Her body shook, not just from the cold, but from something deeper, something that felt like fear and hunger and the quiet understanding that no one was coming. Not for her. Not anymore. Then her foot caught. She went down hard, the impact knocking what little air she had left from her lungs, snow rushing up to meet her, cold and suffocating. And for a moment, she did not move. Could not. The storm roared overhead, indifferent. Her cheek pressed into the frozen ground, and she thought, dimly, that this was how it ended. Alone. Unwanted. Forgotten before she had ever been chosen. The thought should have hurt more. Instead, it felt distant, like something happening to someone else. Her eyes began to close. Just for a second. Just enough to rest. Then something shifted. A shadow moved through the white haze, tall, solid, cutting against the storm in a way that did not belong to wind or snow. Heavy boots crunched closer, deliberate, unhurried, as if the storm itself had no claim on him. Clara forced her eyes open, lashes crusted with frost, vision blurring, and through the spinning white she saw him. Broad shoulders beneath a dark coat, snow catching in his hair, his outline steady where everything else broke apart. He did not rush. He did not call out. He simply reached her. A gloved hand closed around her arm, firm, unyielding, and heat followed, real heat, seeping through the numbness like something dangerous, something she had almost forgotten existed. She gasped, the sound raw and fragile, as he pulled her upright in one controlled motion, her body swaying toward him before she could stop it, before she could remember how to hold herself together. Up close, he was even larger, solid in a way that felt impossible out here, his presence cutting through the storm like a wall, like something the wind could not move. His eyes found hers, sharp, assessing, not soft, not kind, but steady, and for a second the world narrowed again, not to the storm this time, but to the space between them. She tried to speak, to explain, to tell him she was not supposed to be here, that she was the wrong woman, but her voice failed her, caught somewhere between breath and fear. His grip tightened just slightly, enough to keep her from falling again, enough to remind her she was still standing. Still here, still seen. The wind howled louder, tearing at her dress, pushing against them both, but he did not move away. Instead, he turned, guiding her forward with a pressure that allowed no argument, no hesitation, his body taking the brunt of the storm as he led her toward that dark shape in the distance, the cabin she had barely seen before. Each step felt unreal, her legs weak, her thoughts scattered, the world tilting between exhaustion and something else she could not yet name. She did not know who he was. She did not know why he had come out into this storm. She only knew that his hand had not let go, and that for the first time since she had been sent away, she was no longer completely alone. But as the cabin door came into view, solid and closed against the storm, one thought pushed through the haze, sharp enough to hurt. What would happen when he realized she was not the bride he was waiting for? The door slammed shut behind them, cutting the storm off like a knife. But the silence that followed was not relief. It was heavier, tighter, filled with the low crackle of fire and the sound of wood settling in the cold. Clara staggered as warmth rushed toward her, too fast, too sudden, her body not ready for it. And she would have fallen if his hand had not steadied her again, firm at her elbow, holding her upright without asking permission. The cabin smelled of smoke and worn timber, of something lived in but not softened, and the fire in the hearth cast a low amber glow that flickered across the walls, across him, across her. She became aware of everything at once. The way her dress clung to her skin, the way her fingers trembled uncontrollably, the way her breath came shallow and uneven, visible in faint clouds that slowly faded in the warmer air. He let go only when he was sure she could stand, stepping back just enough to create space, but not distance, never fully turning away from her, his attention fixed, controlled, measuring. He moved with purpose, not urgency, crossing the room in a few quiet steps to grab a thick wool blanket draped over a chair, the fabric rough and heavy, and when he returned, he paused for the briefest moment before placing it around her shoulders. The contact was brief, intentional. His knuckles brushed the side of her neck, just enough to remind her how cold she still was, how warm he was not. Clara sucked in a breath she did not mean to take, her body reacting before her mind could catch up, and for a second neither of them moved. The fire cracked. The wind pressed faintly against the walls outside, searching for a way back in. She lowered her gaze first, focusing on the worn floorboards beneath her boots, gathering what little strength she had left. "I was sent," she managed, her voice hoarse, unfamiliar, the words catching in her throat as if they did not belong to her. Silence followed, not empty, waiting. She felt it in the way he did not interrupt, did not soften, did not offer anything to make it easier. "Not the one you wrote for," she added, forcing the truth out before she lost her nerve, before the weight of his gaze made her falter. The words hung between them, fragile and sharp. The cabin seemed to shrink around them, the space tightening with something unspoken. He did not react right away. That was worse. He studied her. Instead, his eyes moving slowly, deliberately, taking in the details she could not hide, the threadbare fabric, the way the blanket swallowed her shoulders, the faint tremor in her hands that she tried and failed to still. It was not a cruel look. It was not kind either. It was something else, something that saw too much. "Then where is she?" he asked at last, his voice low, steady, the kind of voice that did not need to rise to carry weight. Clara swallowed, the motion visible in the soft light, her throat tight. "Gone." A single word. Final. The fire shifted, sending shadows climbing along the walls. His jaw tightened, just slightly, the only sign that her answer had landed where it mattered. He turned away then, not dismissing her, but not staying still either, moving to the hearth to push another log into the fire, sparks lifting briefly before settling again. "Control. Always control. Storm like this," he said after a moment, still facing the flames. "You do not walk out of it twice." It was not a question, not an offer, a statement. Clara pulled the blanket closer around herself, the coarse wool scratching against her skin, grounding her in the moment. She knew what he was saying. She knew what he was not saying. She could feel the edge of it, the choice hanging just out of reach, balance between the door and the fire, between the storm and whatever this was. He turned back to her slowly, the firelight catching in his eyes, reflecting something deeper now, something quieter but no less intense. "So you tell me," he said, his gaze locking onto hers, unyielding, "why I should let you stay." The question settled between them like frost on glass, thin and sharp and impossible to ignore. Clara felt it in her chest, in the hollow ache that had followed her across miles of empty land, in the quiet panic that rose now, slow and suffocating, as she realized this was the moment that decided everything. Stay, or be turned back into the storm. Live, or vanish into it. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the blanket, knuckles pale beneath the firelight, as she forced herself to lift her gaze again and meet his. He did not look away. He never did. That was the first thing she understood about him. He waited. Not impatient, not cruel, just certain, as if the answer already existed, and all he was doing was giving her the chance to speak it aloud. The wind rattled the cabin walls, a low, relentless sound that crept into the silence, reminding her exactly what stood on the other side of that door. Cold, endless, final. "Because I will work," she said, her voice steadier than she felt, each word pulled from somewhere deeper than fear, somewhere stubborn and unyielding. "I can cook, clean, mend, whatever you need done. I will not be a burden." The last word lingered, heavier than the rest. She saw it register in his expression, not as surprise, but as recognition. He stepped closer then, one measured step that closed the distance between them just enough to make her breath catch, the warmth from his body cutting through the chill, still clinging to her skin. Not touching, not yet, but close enough that she could feel the presence of him, solid and grounded in a way that made everything else feel uncertain. Out here, he said quietly, his voice lower now, more deliberate. Everyone is a burden if they cannot hold their own. His eyes moved over her again, slower this time, not missing the way her shoulders trembled beneath the blanket, the way her boots were worn thin at the edges, the way exhaustion pulled at her posture no matter how straight she tried to stand. It was not judgment. It was assessment. Clara straightened anyway, lifting her chin just a fraction, refusing to let the weight of his gaze bend her. Then let me prove it. The words came faster now, sharper, driven by something that felt dangerously close to desperation, but held together by will. Give me one day. If I cannot keep up, I will leave on my own. Even as she said it, the reality of that promise pressed in around her, cold and absolute. Leave on her own meant walking back into the storm, into a world that had already decided she did not belong in it. A flicker passed through his eyes. Not softness. Something else. Something more complicated. He shifted his weight slightly, the floorboards creaking under his boots, the sound loud in the tight space between them. You would not make it a mile, he said, not unkindly, but without hesitation, as if stating a fact he had no intention of softening. The truth of it hit harder than if he had raised his voice. Clara swallowed, her throat tight, but she did not step back. Could not. Not now. Then I will not fail. Silence followed. Longer this time. Thicker. The fire cracked behind him, casting shifting light across his face, across the lines that spoke of long days and harder winters. He studied her again, but something had changed. The distance in his gaze had narrowed, just slightly, replaced by something more focused, more present. He reached out then, sudden enough to make her flinch before she could stop herself, his hand closing gently around her wrist, not restraining, not rough, but firm enough to still her. The contact sent a sharp awareness through her, not fear, not quite, but something that made her pulse quicken in a way she could not explain. His thumb brushed once, just once, over the inside of her wrist, where her pulse beat fast and unsteady beneath his touch, as if confirming something only he could feel. You are already shaking, he said quietly. Clara forced herself to hold his gaze, even as her breath hitched, even as the warmth of his hand contrasted too sharply with the cold still lingering in her bones. I am still standing. That seemed to matter. More than it should have. His grip loosened, but he did not pull away immediately, the space between them charged with something unspoken, something building just beneath the surface of every word they had exchanged. Then, slowly he let go. One day, he said at last, the decision landing with quiet finality. You stay, you work, you prove it. Relief tried to rise, but it caught somewhere in her chest, tangled with something else, something sharper, something that felt like stepping onto ground that could give way at any moment. Because this was not safety. This was a test. And as he turned slightly, gesturing toward the deeper part of the cabin, his voice came again, low and controlled, carrying a weight she could not yet measure. And if you fail, he added, his eyes finding hers once more, steady and unreadable, I will be the one who walks you back out into that storm. The fire had burned lower, the light softer now, stretching shadows longer across the walls as the wind outside sharpened, slipping through the cracks in the wood with a thin, whistling sound that never quite stopped. Night had settled fully, heavy and absolute, pressing in on the cabin from all sides, turning it into a small island of warmth surrounded by something vast and unforgiving. Clara stood where he had left her, the blanket still wrapped tight around her shoulders, but the heat no longer reached deep enough to stop the tremor beneath her skin. It was not just the cold anymore. It was the weight of what he had said. One day, prove it, or be sent back out. Her gaze shifted toward the door, toward the darkness waiting beyond it, and something in her chest tightened, sharp and immediate. She would not go back out there. Not again. Not for anyone. Not even him. The thought settled, solidifying into something stronger than fear. When she turned back, he was watching her again. He had not moved far, leaning one shoulder against the rough timber near the hearth, arms relaxed at his sides, but nothing about him felt casual. He was still measuring, still deciding, always in control. Clara drew in a slow breath, steadying herself, then took a step forward. Not away, toward him. The movement was small, but it shifted something in the room. His eyes narrowed just slightly, not in warning, but in awareness, tracking her as she closed the distance by a single pace. "If I stay," she said, her voice quieter now, but firmer, "then it will not be as charity." The words hung there, fragile and bold all at once. The wind pressed harder against the walls, a low groan echoing through the wood, as if the night itself was listening. He did not respond immediately. Of course he did not. Instead, he pushed off the wall and stepped forward to meet her, the space between them shrinking again, deliberate, controlled, until they stood close enough that she could feel the warmth of him without being touched. It was different this time. Not just his presence. Something in her had shifted too. She did not look down. She did not step back. "You do not get to decide everything," she added, the words coming faster now, driven by something she had kept buried too long. "I was sent here without a choice. I will not stay without one." Silence followed, thick and immediate, the kind that pressed against the skin. His jaw tightened, just slightly, the only sign that her words had struck deeper than she could see. For a moment, she thought she had gone too far, that this was the line, that he would turn, open the door, and send her straight back into the storm without another word. Instead, he moved closer. One step, then another, close enough now that her breath caught, close enough that she had to tilt her head slightly to hold his gaze, close enough that the world outside the two of them seemed to fall away. "You are in my house," he said quietly, his voice lower than before, not raised, but heavier, carrying something that felt like a warning and something else she could not quite name. "In a storm that would take you before you made it past the fence." His eyes did not leave hers. Not for a second. "That gives me a say." Clara felt the words hit, felt the truth in them, undeniable and cold, but she did not look away. Could not. Not now. "It does," she said, her voice softer, but no less steady. "But it does not give you all of it." The air shifted again. Something sharp. Something alive. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The fire cracked behind him, sending a flicker of light across his face, across the lines that made him seem older, harder, and yet somehow more real in this moment than before. Then, slowly, his hand lifted. Clara stilled, every nerve tightening, her breath catching as his fingers hovered near her shoulder, just above the edge of the blanket. He did not touch her right away. He waited, watching her, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to. She did not. The contact, when it came, was light but deliberate, his hand settling against the blanket at her shoulder, steady, grounding, his thumb pressing just enough to remind her of his strength, of the control he held and chose not to use. "Then say it," he murmured, his voice quieter now, closer, the distance between them almost gone. "What is your condition?" Clara's heart pounded, loud enough she was sure he could hear it, but she did not hesitate this time. "If I stay," she said, her eyes locked on his, "I stay because you choose me. Not because I was sent." The words changed everything. She felt it the moment they left her lips. His hand stilled against her shoulder. The air between them tightened, charged with something deeper than before, something that had nothing to do with survival and everything to do with choice. For the first time since she had stepped into that cabin, he did not answer right away. And that hesitation was new. The silence stretched, thick and fragile, as the fire shifted and sent a slow wave of heat between them, catching in Clara's lungs in a way that felt almost dangerous. He had not moved his hand, not from her shoulder, not even when her words settled in the space between them, changing the shape of everything that had come before. She felt it now, that change, subtle but undeniable, like the moment before a storm breaks or the second before a door opens to something you cannot take back. His fingers pressed slightly, not enough to restrain, but enough to anchor, to remind her that she stood in his space, under his roof, inside something he controlled. And yet, he had not pulled away. "You ask a lot," he said at last, his voice lower than before, roughened by something that was not quite resistance and not quite agreement. Clara held his gaze, even as her pulse thudded hard beneath her skin, even as every instinct told her she stood too close, too exposed, too aware of him in a way that had nothing to do with survival anymore. "I asked to be seen," she answered, softer now, but no less steady. The words landed differently. Not sharp, not defensive, honest. That was what shifted him. She saw it, the flicker in his eyes, the brief tightening of something he usually kept locked down, the kind of reaction that slipped through before it could be controlled. His hand moved then, slowly, sliding from her shoulder down the length of the blanket, not lingering, not crossing a line, but tracing just enough of her presence to make the air feel thinner, tighter, charged. When he stepped back, the loss of that contact was immediate, unexpected, and Clara hated that she felt it. The distance between them returned, but it was not the same distance as before. Something remained in it now. Something alive. He turned toward the fire again, but not fully. Away from her, always keeping her within his line of sight, as if even in retreat, he refused to let her slip out of his awareness. "You were not sent here to be chosen," he said after a moment, his voice quieter, steadier, as if he was reminding himself as much as her. Clara's fingers tightened against the blanket. "I know." The admission came easier than she expected. That was the truth she had carried with her from the moment she stepped off that stagecoach. Not chosen, not wanted, just sent. The fire cracked sharply, sending sparks upward, and for a second the light flared brighter, illuminating the strain in her face, the exhaustion she could no longer hide. She swayed, just slightly, but he saw it. Of course he did. He moved before she could stop him, closing the space again in 2 quick steps, his hand catching her arm, stronger this time, more immediate, steadying her before she could falter. "You have not eaten," he said, not asking. Clara shook her head once, the motion small, her pride too worn down to deny it. His jaw set, something darker passing through his expression, not anger, not exactly, but a reaction that came from deeper than either. Without another word, he guided her toward the table, his grip firm but careful, releasing her only when he was certain she could stand on her own. He turned away then, reaching for a pot near the fire, ladling something warm into a tin bowl, the steam rising in soft curls that caught the light. When he handed it to her, his fingers brushed hers again, briefly, and this time neither of them pulled back right away. Clara felt the warmth of the bowl seep into her hands, into her bones, grounding her in a way the blanket had not. She hesitated for just a second, her eyes lifting to his, searching for something she could not name. Permission, maybe, or something deeper. He did not speak. He simply watched her, steady and present, as if this, too, mattered more than either of them had expected. She took the first bite slowly, the heat sharp against her lips, her throat tightening as the reality of it hit her all at once. Warmth, food, safety. Her breath caught, not from cold this time, but from something breaking loose inside her, something she had held together for too long. She turned slightly away, just enough to hide it, but not enough to fully escape his gaze. He saw. He always saw. And for the first time, he did not look at her like a problem to solve or a task to measure. He looked at her like something that had already begun to matter. The realization landed hard. For both of them. Clara lowered the bowl slowly, her hands no longer shaking from cold, but from something far more dangerous. "If I stay," she said again, quieter now, the words carrying a weight they had not held before, "then it changes things." He did not answer immediately. The fire shifted again, the wind pressed harder against the walls, and the space between them tightened with something that could no longer be ignored. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower than it had ever been, steady, but no longer untouched. "It already has." By morning, the storm had not passed, it had tightened its grip. The wind no longer howled, it pressed, constant and heavy, driving snow against the cabin walls in a steady hiss that never let up, like something waiting, patient and certain. The fire had burned low again, and the warmth inside felt thinner now, harder to hold, as if the cold outside was slowly finding its way in. Clara stood near the small window, her breath faint against the glass, watching nothing but white. No road, no sky, no direction, just endless motion, blurring the world into something that did not forgive mistakes. Behind her, she could hear him moving, quiet, efficient, every motion measured. The scrape of wood, the shift of iron, the small, controlled sounds of a man who had done this before. Many times. Survived it. The thoughts settled in her chest, equal parts relief and unease. Because surviving here meant something different. It meant knowing what could be lost. It will last another day, he said, his voice cutting through the low rhythm of the storm without raising, steady as ever. Clara did not turn right away. And after that, a pause, just long enough to feel. If the wind drops. If. The word lingered. She turned then, slowly, her gaze finding him across the room. He was near the door now, pulling on his coat, thick and worn, snow already clinging to the shoulders where he had stepped out earlier. His movements were the same, controlled, certain, but there was something else beneath it now. Tension, not from fear, from calculation. You are going out, she said, the realization landing sharp. Not a question. His eyes met hers briefly, then moved past, checking the latch on the door, the rifle resting nearby, the small details that meant survival out here. Livestock, he said. If they do not hold, we lose them. We. The word slipped through without effort, but Clara caught it, felt it settle somewhere deeper than it should have. She stepped away from the window, the blanket slipping slightly from her shoulders as she moved closer, the warmth of the fire fading behind her. Then I am coming with you. The words surprised even her, but once spoken, they did not waver. He stilled. Not completely, just enough to notice. Slowly, he turned toward her again, his gaze sharper now, more focused, as if reassessing something he had already decided. No, simple. Final. Clara's jaw tightened, her hands curling slightly at her sides. You said I stay and work. This is work. The wind pressed harder against the walls, the cabin groaning faintly, the storm reminding them both that time was not a luxury they had. He took a step toward her, closing the distance again, not as close as before, but enough that she felt it, that shift in the air, that presence that made everything feel narrower, more intense. This is not the same, he said, his voice lower now, not louder, but heavier, carrying something that was not open for argument. Clara held her ground. Then show me the difference. The words landed, sharp and unyielding, and for a second, something flickered in his expression, something close to frustration, but deeper, more controlled. He exhaled slowly, the breath visible in the cooler air near the door, his gaze dropping briefly to where the blanket had slipped, to the thin fabric beneath, to the way she still carried the storm in her bones. When his eyes lifted again, they were different, not softer, clearer. Out there, he said quietly, you do not get a second chance. The meaning settled between them, heavy and immediate. Clara felt it, the warning, the truth, the line he was drawing, but something in her refused to step back from it. Neither do I, she answered, her voice steady despite the tension tightening in her chest. Not if I stay here and wait to be sent away when I am no longer useful. That hit. She saw it, not in his words, in the stillness that followed. The way his shoulders squared, just slightly, the way his gaze locked onto hers and did not shift. The fire cracked behind them, loud in the silence. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then, without another word, he reached for a second coat, heavier, worn but intact, and stepped toward her. Clara stilled as he lifted it, the movement deliberate, controlled, the fabric brushing her arms as he settled it around her shoulders, his hands firm as he adjusted it, pulling it closed against her chest, his fingers lingering just long enough to ensure it would hold against the wind. Stay close, he said, his voice low, closer now, the words meant for her alone. Not a suggestion, a condition. The contact broke as quickly as it had come, but the warmth of it remained, sharper than before. He turned then, pulling the door open, and the storm surged in, cold and violent, swallowing the warmth in an instant. Clara stepped forward without hesitation, the wind hitting her like a wall, her breath catching, her vision narrowing again to white and movement and the solid shape of him just ahead. He did not look back, but he slowed, just enough for her to keep up. They moved into the storm together, the world closing around them, the cabin disappearing behind in seconds, swallowed whole by the white. And then, through the shifting haze, Clara saw it. Tracks fresh, not theirs, leading straight toward the ranch. The wind swallowed sound, swallowed distance, swallowed everything but the steady presence just ahead of her, and Clara forced herself to follow. One step, then another, her boots sinking deep into the drift as the storm closed in tighter, heavier, until even the sky disappeared. The tracks cut through the snow like a warning, fresh and deliberate, leading straight toward the ranch, toward the place that had become the only barrier between her and nothing. Ethan stopped. Not abruptly, not in panic. He simply stopped moving, and the shift was enough to send Clara nearly into him, her gloved hands catching against his coat, her breath breaking against his back. As the wind roared around them, for a second, neither of them moved. The world narrowed to the space between their bodies, to the heat trapped between layers of cold, to the sharp rhythm of breath that no longer belonged to just one of them. He turned then, fast enough to face her, slow enough that she saw it coming, his hands catching her arms before she could lose balance, before the storm could pull her away. His grip was firm, grounding, not letting go. Snow clung to his hair, to the rough line of his jaw, melting slowly under the heat of his skin, and his eyes locked onto hers with a focus that cut through everything else. "You see them," he said, his voice low, barely carrying over the wind, but she heard it, felt it. Clara nodded, her breath uneven, her chest tight, the reality of it settling in hard. Someone had been here. Recently. Close. Too close. The storm pressed harder, swirling around them, closing visibility until the world shrank to a few feet in every direction. No road. No cabin. No safety. Just him. Just her. Just the choice that stood between them. His hands tightened slightly on her arms, not to restrain, but to hold her steady as the wind shoved against them both. "We go back," he said, the words direct, controlled, already decided. Clara felt the resistance rise before she could stop it, sharp and immediate, driven by something deeper than fear. "Or we follow," she answered, the thought forming as she spoke it, dangerous and undeniable. His gaze sharpened, the air between them tightening instantly. No, one word. Final. The wind howled louder, pushing against them, forcing them closer together, her coat brushing his, the contact unavoidable now, constant. Clara held his gaze, refusing to look away, even as the storm blurred the edges of everything else. "If someone is out here," she said, her voice steadier than she felt, "then going back does not make it safer." The truth of it hung there, heavy and cold. He knew it. She saw it in the brief flicker behind his eyes, the calculation shifting, adjusting, reworking itself in real time. But something else moved beneath it too. Something sharper. Protective. His hand slid from her arm to her shoulder, pulling her slightly behind him, positioning her without thinking, placing himself between her and the direction of those tracks, between her and whatever had come close enough to leave them. "You stay with me," he said, quieter now, but stronger, the words carrying a weight that was not open for argument. Clara's breath caught, not from the cold, but from the force of it, from the way he said it like it was already true, like it had already been decided somewhere deeper than either of them had admitted. "I am not leaving," she said, the words slipping out before she could measure them, before she could soften them. The wind surged, wrapping around them, pressing them closer still, until there was no space left to pretend distance existed. His face was inches from hers now, close enough that she could see every detail, the frost along his lashes, the tension set deep in his jaw, the way his eyes did not waver even for a second. "This is not about leaving," he said, his voice lower than before, closer, almost lost in the storm but not to her. "This is about surviving." Clara felt the words hit, felt the truth in them, but something inside her refused to step back from what had already changed. Then stop deciding that alone. The silence that followed was immediate, electric, cutting through the storm for a single, suspended second. His grip shifted, not loosening, not tightening, but changing, his hand sliding slightly, steadying her again as the wind pushed hard enough to nearly take her footing. He did not let it, did not let her. The space between them held, fragile and unbreakable all at once. Then his gaze broke, just for a fraction of a second, shifting past her, over her shoulder, towards something in the storm she could not yet see. The change in him was instant. Subtle, but absolute. His posture sharpened, his focus narrowing, every line of him tightening with a quiet, controlled alertness that sent a cold wave through her that had nothing to do with the wind. "We are not alone out here," he said, barely above a whisper, as a dark shape moved through the white, closer than either of them had expected. The cabin door shut hard against the storm, sealing them back into the dim glow of firelight. But the silence that followed was heavier than before, thick with something neither of them spoke. Clara stood, just inside the threshold, snow melting slowly from her coat, pooling at her boots, her breath uneven as it adjusted to the warmer air, though the cold still clung deep beneath her skin. Ethan moved past her without a word, securing the latch, checking it twice, his motions precise, controlled, but tighter now, as if something unseen had shifted beyond the walls. The fire had burned lower, its light softer, flickering across the rough wood and casting long shadows that stretched and pulled across the room. It felt smaller somehow. Closer. Clara stepped further in, slowly, her gaze drifting toward the hearth, toward the fading warmth. But her mind remained outside, caught in that moment when his hand had pulled her back, when his body had moved between her and something she had not even fully seen. The memory stayed. Not loud, not sharp, just present. Ethan crossed to the fire, adding another log, the flames flaring briefly before settling again. But even that warmth felt uncertain now, as if it could not fully push back what had followed them inside. Neither of them spoke. Not right away. The quiet stretched, filled only by the soft crackle of wood and the distant, relentless push of wind against the cabin. Clara removed the heavier coat he had given her, her fingers slower now, more aware, as if every small movement carried weight. She placed it carefully over the back of the chair, her hand lingering on the worn fabric for a second longer than necessary. Then she turned. He was already watching her. Not the same way as before. Something had shifted. The distance between them remained, but it no longer felt like control. It felt like restraint. His gaze held hers for a moment, steady, searching, before it moved away, just slightly, as if choosing not to press further. That, more than anything, unsettled her. "You saw it too," she said quietly, her voice softer now, grounded but not untouched. He nodded once, the motion small, contained. Tracks do not come this close by accident. The words settled between them, calm on the surface, but carrying something deeper. Clara's chest tightened. Then someone knows this place. A pause. The fire cracked again, or is looking for it. He did not answer right away. Instead, he moved toward the table, his hand resting briefly against its edge, his fingers tapping once, twice, as if measuring something unseen. Clara watched him, the silence stretching again, heavier this time, filled with questions neither of them voiced. She took a step closer without realizing it, drawn not by certainty, but by the need to understand what had already begun to change. "You were not surprised," she said, the realization forming as she spoke it. That made him look at her again. Direct. Unavoidable. The air shifted. "I was not unprepared," he corrected, his voice low, even, but there was something beneath it now, something she had not heard before. Something guarded. Clara felt it immediately. That is not the same. The words came faster than she intended, but she did not take them back. The tension returned, subtle but sharp, threading through the space between them. His jaw tightened again, the faintest shift, but enough. "Out here," he said slowly, each word deliberate. "You do not wait to be surprised." Clara held his gaze, but something in her shifted too, something quieter, more aware of the lines she was stepping across. "And what are you waiting for then?" The question hung there, unanswered, heavy with everything that had not been said. For a moment, he did not respond. The fire dimmed slightly, the shadows deepening along the walls, and the wind pressed harder against the cabin, a low, constant reminder that whatever was outside had not gone away. Then, finally, he spoke. For it to come closer. The words settled, slow and certain, and Clara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the storm. Her gaze flickered toward the door, then back to him, her pulse quickening again, the fragile sense of safety unraveling piece by piece. Neither of them moved. Neither of them looked away. And somewhere beneath the sound of the wind, faint but unmistakable, something shifted outside. Not the storm. Something else. Something deliberate. Then stillness. The sound came again, faint but deliberate. Not the wind, not the shifting wood. Something else, something that moved with intent just beyond the walls, and Clara felt it before she understood it. A tightening low in her chest that had nothing to do with cold. Ethan had already turned toward the door, his body still, listening in a way that made the air itself feel strained, as if even the fire had quieted to hear what came next. Neither of them spoke. Not yet. Clara took a slow step forward, closer than before, her voice lower now, steadier in a way it had not been when she first crossed that threshold. You knew someone might come. It was not a question. The silence that followed stretched, long enough to confirm what she already felt shifting beneath everything. He did not deny it. His gaze flicked to her, sharp, assessing, measuring something new now, not just her strength, but her understanding. This land, he said finally, quiet, controlled, does not stay unclaimed for long. Clara's fingers tightened at her sides, but she did not step back. Not this time. That is not what I meant. The words landed firmer, cutting through the space between them, and for the first time since she had arrived, she saw something change in him that had nothing to do with control. Something closer to hesitation. He held her gaze, but not as easily, not as untouched. The fire shifted, light catching in his eyes, and for a second, she saw it. Not the man who had pulled her from the storm, not the one who decided who stayed and who left, but someone else, someone who had been here longer than the cabin, longer than the quiet rules he lived by. You are not just protecting this place, she said, softer now, but more certain. You are waiting for something. That hit deeper than anything before. His jaw tightened, not sharply, but enough. The silence that followed was no longer neutral. It was edged, heavy, real. Clara took another step closer, closing the distance he had kept so carefully measured, her breath steady, her eyes locked onto his. Who are they? The question hung there, unavoidable. For a moment, he did not answer. The wind pressed harder against the cabin, the walls creaking low, and the fire dimmed just enough to deepen the shadows between them. Then, slowly, he exhaled. Not defeated, not yielding, choosing. Men who think everything out here belongs to them, he said, his voice lower now, stripped of anything unnecessary. Clara felt the weight of that settle, but something did not fit. Not fully. Her gaze sharpened, her instincts catching on the space between his words. And you do not. It was not a challenge. It was a test. His eyes met hers again, steady, but no longer distant. I did not come here to own it, he said. I came here to keep it. The difference was subtle, but it changed everything. Clara felt it immediately, the shift in how she saw him, how she understood the silence, the control, the way he had never spoken more than necessary. This was not just survival. This was waiting, guarding, choosing not to leave. Her breath slowed, her thoughts aligning, and then, quietly, she reached into the folds of her dress, her hands steady despite the weight of what she was about to do. Ethan's gaze dropped instantly, sharp again, tracking the movement, his body tensing just slightly, not in fear, but in readiness. She pulled out a folded piece of paper, worn, creased from being held too tightly for too long, and held it between them. Then you should know, she said, her voice softer now, but carrying something undeniable. They are not just looking for land. The air stilled. Completely. Ethan did not reach for it right away. He looked at her instead, his eyes searching, sharper than before, deeper, as if trying to read something she had kept hidden until now. Where did you get that? He asked, his voice low, controlled, but no longer untouched. Clara held his gaze, not flinching, not retreating, the distance between them gone now in every way that mattered. It was never meant for me, she said. A pause. Just long enough to change everything. It was meant for the man I was supposed to marry. Silence followed. Heavy. Absolute. And in that silence, the truth settled into place. He had not been waiting for her. He had been waiting for something else entirely. The paper did not move between them, but everything else did. The storm outside surged harder, wind slamming against the cabin with a force that made the walls groan, the fire flickering low as if it, too, felt the shift in the air. Ethan's gaze stayed locked on Clara, not on the paper, not yet, but on her, searching, measuring, recalculating everything he thought he understood. You brought that here, he said, his voice quieter now, but edged with something sharper than before. Not accusation. Not entirely. Something closer to realization. Clara did not look away. Not now. Not after everything that had already changed. I did not know what it meant, she said, her voice steady, even as her pulse thundered beneath her skin. Not until I saw the tracks. Not until I saw you. That landed. harder than anything else. His jaw tightened, the faintest shift, but enough to break the stillness. He reached for the paper then, finally, his fingers brushing hers as he took it, the contact brief but charged, neither of them pulling away immediately. The air between them tightened, sharper, thinner, as if the space itself could not hold everything that had surfaced. He unfolded it slowly, his movements controlled, deliberate, but there was tension there now, unmistakable, running through every motion. His eyes scanned the page, once, then again, slower, deeper, the firelight catching the change in his expression, the way something inside him locked into place. Clara watched him, her breath shallow, her chest tight, knowing without knowing that whatever he saw, it was not new to him. It was confirmation. The wind roared louder, pushing against the cabin, rattling the door, as if trying to break through, as if whatever had been set in motion could no longer be held back. He lowered the paper slightly, his gaze lifting to hers again, but it was different now. No distance, no hesitation, just clarity. "They are not coming for the land," he said, his voice low, steady, each word landing with weight. "They are coming for this. The paper, the truth." Clara felt the shift immediately, the way the ground beneath everything she thought she understood gave way, replaced by something far more dangerous. "Then we cannot stay," she said, the words coming faster now, driven by instinct, by survival, by the sudden clarity of what had followed her here. He did not move, did not step back, did not agree. His eyes held hers, unyielding, something deeper surfacing beneath the control he had held so tightly until now. "If we leave," he said, quieter, but heavier, "they follow." The truth of it hit, like the storm itself. Clara felt it in her chest, in the sharp pull between fear and something else she had not expected to feel so soon, so deeply. Because leaving meant survival. But staying meant standing in something that could not be undone. The fire cracked sharply, the last of the stronger flames settling into a lower, steadier burn, the light dimming, pulling them closer into shadow. Ethan stepped forward then, closing the space between them again. Closer than before, close enough that she could feel the heat of him even through the cold that still lingered in her bones. His hand lifted, not to take, not to restrain, but to steady, resting just at her shoulder, grounding her in place as everything else shifted. "You did not know what you carried," he said, his voice lower now, closer, not accusing, not forgiving, just certain. Clara held his gaze, her breath catching, the weight of his words pressing in, but she did not step back. "I know now." The silence that followed was immediate, absolute, filled with everything neither of them had said, everything that had already begun to bind them together in ways neither had chosen, but neither could ignore. Outside, the wind howled louder, something striking faintly against the far side of the cabin, a dull, deliberate sound that did not belong to the storm. Ethan's head turned slightly, just enough to listen, his body shifting, instinct sharpening, every line of him tightening with quiet readiness. Clara felt it, the change, the way the moment between them snapped into something sharper, more immediate, more dangerous. His hand remained on her shoulder, not letting go, not moving away. "They are here," he said, barely above a whisper, his eyes returning to hers, steady, unyielding. The choice hung between them, clear now, unavoidable, heavier than anything that had come before. Stay or run, fight the storm, or face what had followed it. Clara's breath slowed, her gaze locking onto his, the fear still there, but something else rising beneath it, something stronger, something that did not belong to the girl who had been sent here by mistake. "Then we do not run," she said, the words quiet, but final. The air stilled, just for a second, and in that second, everything changed. He did not answer right away. He did not move. He only looked at her, closer than ever before, his breath visible between them, his control held by something thinner than it had ever been. And then, slowly, his grip on her shoulder tightened, just enough to anchor, just enough to decide, as something outside the door shifted again, closer now, waiting for them to make the choice. The storm had passed, but the cold remained, settled deep into the bones of the land and everything standing on it. Dawn came slow and pale, a thin light stretching across the snow like something fragile, uncertain if it should stay. Inside the cabin, The fire had burned down to embers, a soft glow that barely pushed back the shadows, and the air felt still in a way that followed something already decided. Clara stood near the hearth, her hands wrapped loosely around a tin cup that had long since cooled, her breath steady now, no longer sharp with fear, but slower, heavier, as if each inhale carried the weight of what had been left behind in the night. Across from her, Ethan remained by the door, his coat still on, though the wind no longer demanded it, his posture quiet, no longer braced, but not yet at rest. The space between them held, not wide, not distant, but deliberate, shaped by everything that had changed and everything that could not return to what it had been. Neither of them spoke at first. They did not need to. The silence was no longer empty. It was full of choices made, of lines crossed, of something that had shifted beyond survival. Clara's gaze lifted slowly, finding his, and this time, he did not look away, did not step back, did not retreat behind the distance he had kept so carefully before. There was no storm now to hide behind, no urgency to excuse the closeness, only truth. "They are gone," she said quietly, her voice softer than it had been, but clearer, steadier, carrying none of the uncertainty that had marked her before. He nodded once. For now, the words did not carry fear. They carried acceptance. Clara stepped forward then, just one pace, closing the distance he had once controlled so easily, and this time, he did not move to correct it. He stayed where he was, letting her choose it, letting her stand there. That was new. That was everything. "You could have sent me away," she said, her eyes holding his, searching not for answers now, but for something deeper, something that did not need to be spoken to be understood. Before any of this, a pause, the faint crackle of embers, the quiet stretch of morning light across the floor. He exhaled slowly, the breath visible in the lingering cold, his gaze never leaving hers. "I could have." The truth of it landed without defense, without hesitation, and somehow, that made it heavier. Clara felt it settle, felt the final piece of something fall into place inside her chest, something that had been shifting since the moment he pulled her from the storm. "But you did not," she said. Not a question. Not anymore. He stepped forward then, closing the last of the distance between them, not fast, not sudden, but certain, the movement deliberate in a way that left no space for doubt. They stood close now, closer than before, the warmth between them no longer accidental, no longer borrowed from fire or survival, but something chosen, something held. His hand lifted, slower this time, not testing, not measuring, but steady, settling lightly against her arm, the contact simple, grounded, real. Clara did not flinch, did not pull away. Her breath slowed, her body no longer caught between fear and instinct, but anchored in the moment, in him, in the quiet understanding that had taken shape between them. "You asked to be chosen," he said, his voice low, closer now, stripped of everything except what mattered. Clara held his gaze, her heart steady despite the weight of it. "And you said that changed things." Another pause, not uncertain, just full. His grip tightened slightly, not to hold her in place, but to confirm what was already there, what had already been decided in the silence between them long before either of them spoke it aloud. "It did," he said. The words were simple, but they carried everything. The fire dimmed further, the last of the night fading into morning, the cold still present, but no longer something she faced alone. Clara felt it then, the shift complete, the line crossed not by force, not by need, but by something far quieter, far stronger. She was not here because she had been sent. She was here because she had stayed, because he had let her, because he had chosen not to send her away. The realization settled deep, steady, unshaken by the storm that had passed or the ones that would come. And as the light grew stronger, soft and pale across the frozen land beyond the window, Clara understood something she had not known when she first stepped into that storm. Sometimes survival was not about leaving. Sometimes it was about who chose to stay beside you when everything else tried to take that choice away. The morning did not arrive all at once. It unfolded slowly, like something careful not to disturb what had already been set in motion. Pale light slipped through the narrow gaps in the wooden shutters, stretching across the cabin floor in long, quiet lines, catching the dust in the air and turning it into something almost visible. The cold lingered, not sharp like before, but settled, woven into the walls, into the floor, into the breath that still drifted faintly in the space between them. Clara stood near the window now, her fingers resting lightly against the worn frame. The wood cool beneath her touch as she looked out over a land that had changed without moving at all. The snow still covered everything, smooth and untouched in places, broken in others where tracks had once carved through, now softened, almost erased by the night. It looked peaceful. It was not. Behind her, she could hear him moving, not with urgency, not with tension, but with a quiet steadiness that had replaced something sharper. The sound of a cup set down, the low scrape of a chair shifting. Small things, ordinary things, and yet, none of it felt the same as it had before. Clara turned slightly, just enough to see him without fully facing him, her gaze catching on the way he stood now, not braced, not guarded in the same way, but still aware. Always aware. Their eyes met briefly, and this time, neither of them looked away out of habit or control. The pause held, not heavy, not fragile, but real. Then it passed, naturally, like something that no longer needed to be forced. She moved first. Not away, not toward the door, toward the table, toward him. The distance between them closed without resistance, without calculation, her steps steady, grounded in something that had not existed when she first crossed this threshold. He watched her come, his expression unchanged at a glance. But there was something deeper now, something quieter, something that did not pull back. She reached the table and paused, her hand resting lightly against its surface, her fingers brushing the grain of the wood as if anchoring herself in the moment. "It is quieter," she said, her voice soft, but clear, the words carrying more than just the observation. He nodded once, his gaze shifting briefly toward the window, then back to her. Storms leave that behind. A simple answer, but not a simple truth. Clara let that settle, her eyes drifting again, not away from him, but across him, taking in the details she had once avoided, the lines in his face, the weight in his stance, the quiet control that had not disappeared, but changed. "And what do they take?" she asked, quieter now. The question did not demand an answer. It did not need one. He did not respond right away. His hand moved instead, reaching for the cup she had left untouched earlier, turning it slightly, aligning it without thought, a small, controlled motion that spoke more than words might have. When he did speak, his voice was lower, steadier, shaped by something that had already been decided. Whatever was not meant to last. Clara felt that, not as loss, but as clarity. The fear she had carried, the uncertainty, the constant pull between leaving and staying, it had shifted into something else, something quieter but stronger. She was still here, not because she had nowhere else to go, but because she had chosen not to leave. Her gaze lifted to his again, and this time, there was no question in it. Only recognition. Only understanding. The tension that had once filled the space between them had not vanished. It remained, but softened, transformed into something that did not push them apart, but held them aware of each other, of what had been risked, of what had been kept. He stepped closer then, not closing the distance entirely, but enough that the space between them felt intentional, shared, no longer something one of them controlled alone. His hand rested briefly against the edge of the table near hers, close enough that she felt the presence of it, the warmth, the steadiness, but he did not reach for her. He did not need to. Clara did not move away. Her fingers remained where they were, her breath even, her posture relaxed in a way that had taken everything to achieve. Outside, the light grew stronger, stretching further across the snow, revealing more of the land, more of what waited beyond the quiet. The world had not changed. It had only been revealed. And as Clara stood there, the cold still in the air, the warmth still in the space between them, she understood something that would not leave her. What had begun in the storm had not ended with it. It had only been made visible. And some choices, once made, did not fade with the morning. They remained, steady and silent, waiting to see what would come next. The land opened wide beneath the fading light, endless and quiet, the last stretch of winter giving way to something softer as the sun dipped low across the horizon, painting the plains in long strokes of gold and amber. The wind had gentled, no longer sharp, no longer cutting, but steady and calm, moving through the tall, dry grass and slow waves that whispered instead of warned. Clara stood just outside the cabin, the wooden porch beneath her boots worn smooth by time and weather, her gaze drifting across the land that had once felt like a threat and now felt still. Not empty, not hostile, just waiting. Behind her, the door creaked softly as it opened, the sound familiar now, grounding, and she did not need to turn to know it was him. She felt it before she saw it, the quiet shift in the air, the presence that had once unsettled her now settling into something steady, something she no longer resisted. Ethan stepped out beside her, not too close, not distant. The space between them measured not by caution anymore, but by choice. He rested his hand lightly against the railing, his gaze following hers out across the land, the same land he had held, protected, waited for. For a moment, neither of them spoke. They did not need to. The silence stretched, but it was no longer heavy. It was full of everything that had passed, of everything that had stayed. Clara drew in a slow breath, the air cool but no longer biting, her chest rising and falling in a rhythm that had finally found its place again. "It looks different," she said softly, her voice carrying across the quiet, not breaking it, but becoming part of it. Ethan glanced at her, just briefly, then back to the horizon. "It always does," he said, his tone calm, steady, but no longer distant. "After you decide to stay." The words settled into her, deeper than the cold ever had, anchoring something that had already taken root. Clara turned her head slightly, her eyes finding him now, not searching, not questioning, just seeing. "And if I had left?" A pause. The wind moved gently through the grass below, the light shifting lower, softer, wrapping everything in a quiet glow. He did not answer right away. When he did, his voice was lower, closer, carrying a truth that did not need to be defended. "Then this would have remained the same," he said. "But you would not have." Clara held his gaze, the meaning clear, the weight of it no longer something she feared. She stepped closer then, just enough to close the space that had once been filled with tension, her shoulder nearly brushing his, her presence no longer tentative, no longer uncertain. He did not move away. His hand shifted slightly on the railing, not reaching for her, not holding her, but steady, grounded, as if leaving the choice open. Clara let the moment settle, her fingers resting lightly beside his, not touching, but close enough to feel the warmth that no longer needed to be hidden. The sun dipped lower, the sky deepening into shades of orange and blue, the world stretching wide and open before them, no longer something to escape, but something to stand within. She looked out again, the land no longer foreign, no longer something she had been sent into by mistake. This place, this moment, this man beside her, none of it had been planned. None of it had been promised. And yet, it was here. Real. Chosen. Ethan turned slightly toward her then, just enough that she felt it, that shift in attention, the quiet claim not spoken, but understood. "You can still leave," he said, not as a warning, not as a test, but as something honest, something given freely. Clara did not hesitate. She did not look back at the road she had come from, or the world that had sent her here without choice. She looked forward, then at him. "I know," she said softly. And that was the difference. The wind moved through the plains again, carrying the last light of day across the land, and Clara let her hand rest, just slightly, against his, not held, not taken, but placed there with quiet certainty. He did not pull away. He did not question it. He simply remained, steady as ever, the space between them no longer something to guard, but something to share. The sun slipped below the horizon, leaving behind a soft, lingering glow, and in that quiet, open moment, Clara understood the truth she had been searching for since the storm first took hold. You are not defined by where you were sent, but by where you choose to stay.